games. Nintendo has followed a very unfortunate trend with a lot of their multiplayer-focused games ever since the release of Splatoon on the Wii U in May of 2015, and that is just don't fucking finish the games. Well, it's actually obvious that they finish the games, but instead of releasing the game with all the content they have prepared for it, they hold content back. And then over a couple of months, they give you the content in the form of free updates. But they advertise it as if this is like a bonus. Like, oh man, we're gonna keep the party going. And I just want to talk about this for a little bit. I think a lot of people have talked about this, and I've talked about it myself, but I just kind of want to go over it, very casually, just talk about the games that have done this kind of content release schedule and talk about what I think they did right, what I think they did wrong, if it works for that kind of game. And the first game that did such a thing was Splatoon. Now, in my opinion, it was a bit risky to do this with Splatoon. It was a brand new IP at the time, so you're going to release it in a state where it doesn't have a ton of content, it doesn't make the greatest first impression. And yeah, Splatoon only had a few stages at launch, a single player campaign that lasted you about like 5 hours or so, a local multiplayer mode that absolutely nobody used, and fun online multiplayer, but online multiplayer with not a lot of content to mix things up. You didn't have as many weapons as you may have wanted, only like 5 stages or so. And of course you have the quirky little elements Splatoon loves to throw in there, being there's only like 2 stages you can play like every 4 hours. And with only 5 stages available, wow, this game got boring. But Splatoon 1 stood out because the gameplay was just that much fun. And strangely enough, only like a week or two after the game launched, I remember in like the Nintendo Direct Micro before E3, they announced like, hey, here's some new weapons. They might have even announced a new stage around that time. Like, it was like, why are these coming out so soon? They also held back a mode from being available to everybody until a certain number of players reached like a level in the game. So it was definitely strange, especially for Nintendo fans at the time. But looking back at it all, it's obvious this is kind of like a very light, and I mean light, live service game. Of course, normal live service games have like, the battle pass and more monetization options. And Splatoon doesn't have that. But what Splatoon did have was this feeling of like, this is a living game, this is a living world. It's going to consistently change and update. They obviously wanted Splatoon to feel like it was like in its own world, like the Inklings speak their own language. The fact that every time you boot up the game, you have to watch the Squid Sisters tell you what stages are available. And I'm sorry, the Invisalign I have in makes everything I say sound that much more pathetic right now. But yeah, Splatoon was meant to feel like this living, breathing world. So to some extent, having the free updates does kind of play into that, it makes it feel like you alongside all the other players are experiencing this all together, instead of you unlocking a weapon by yourself, it's almost like you and your friends hear about, a new toy, a new gadget just got released at the store. If something like the NZAP weapon, which is what they announced in that Nintendo Direct Micro, if that was available in the game and you just had to unlock it, that's a very singular experience. That's something really like only you experience. But the fact that it was a free update, it's kind of like you and your friends hear about that and you're like, oh man, we gotta run to Splatoon and buy it. It kind of makes it feel more like, real life, a world. So that definitely could be why they went with this release schedule for Splatoon. Also, it's kind of like an easy way to keep a lot of people engaged. Like every couple of weeks, every month, every couple of months, there's a new thing in the game. So you have more of an excuse to turn on your Wii U and pop the game in and give it a try. Everybody gets to experience something all at the same time. As a counterpoint though, I do feel like, if the content in the game was interesting in of itself, you wouldn't have to release it in this method to get people to consistently play your game. Mario Kart doesn't need this release method. Smash Brothers didn't need this release method. And, people were still playing these games constantly online, just hopping back in, playing the same things over and over and over again. So why do you think Splatoon needs to get free stages updated like over the period of a couple of months when it's just like you ran the risk of burning players out early on? which is something that happens. Because, man, I played Splatoon at launch, I had a great time, but over the next couple of weeks, I fell off of it because it's just like, there's only like 5 maps. I got bored. And you know what? When you get bored and you're like, you know what? I had my fill, it's kind of hard to get right back in the game, even if like later down the line they announced all this content just got released for it. I wouldn't say Splatoon 1 burned me, but because I felt like I had done everything I could have in the game at the time, I just kind of felt like, okay, I'm done. There just wasn't that incentive to pop it back in for a new stage, just like one new stage, you know? Like, it's kind of like, no, I played Splatoon, I'm good. But you know what this release method meant? It meant that you could release the game in an unfinished state and people would buy it. So that means potentially you could just finish the rest of the content later. Either hold it back or finish it later. And that way you may be able to save time and money on your game. Listen, I don't know. That might be what they're doing. Because during the Nintendo Switch era, this is when this content release method really started to overstay its welcome. And that's when more theories started going around about like, okay, why are you doing this? Are you putting this out because you think that's going to retain attention to this game, or you just want to release a game in an incomplete state and potentially like see if you should finish it based on sales and if players are still playing it? This worked fine for Splatoon. You know, I wasn't the biggest fan of it. It definitely got me to stop playing the game a lot sooner than I would have if it had way more content at launch. But I think I was more apologetic towards that because it's just like, hey, it's a new IP, it's really fun, and it's on the Wii U. You know, we'll take what we can get. But Nintendo did a similar thing with Super Mario Maker on the Wii U that same year, though that didn't really feel like it was the same. That game felt fully complete. Didn't feel like it was really missing anything. What they did there was it felt like they were genuinely improving the game. You know, it felt like the free updates to Mario Maker were more so there to address certain complaints or concerns surrounding the game. You know, they added checkpoints and loads of other extra items, and they also did the Mario Maker bookmark site. They did a fair amount of things, not a ton, but definitely enough to an already, in my opinion, complete experience. So I wouldn't really consider Mario Maker to be like the exact same thing here. You know, it still followed the free updates model, but I think it did it right. You know, it was already a complete experience. Here's some extra stuff. But then we move into the Nintendo Switch era with ARMS and Splatoon 2. It really felt like Nintendo wanted ARMS to be the next Splatoon. It has so many similar elements in terms of just the vibe they were going for. You know, all these wacky designed characters in their own unique world. They also did a lot of stuff like the ARMS Test Punch, which was similar to Splatoon's Test Fire. And yeah, this one with the free updates, it was like Splatoon all over again, but like way worse. I just felt like ARMS gameplay didn't go deep enough to really feel like, oh man, I want to just play this over and over and over again. I mean, Splatoon had the full single player campaign, definitely shorter than many, but it was enough to kind of keep you invested. And then you had the online multiplayer focus with all these maps and everything. ARMS was a fighting game that didn't really know if it wanted to be like a super fun party fighting game or an actual like esports fighting game. And because of that, I just always felt like this game didn't really satisfy either camp, you know? It didn't really satisfy people that really wanted to get competitive with it, and it didn't satisfy people that wanted like, oh, fun Smash Brothers with items kind of enjoyment, you know? When it comes to free updates, this game added a bunch of new characters and like badges, which was pretty much an achievement system. Which is cool, but it's also like, I didn't care by the time they added that. I thought ARMS was sufficient. I love how it looks, how it sounds. The gameplay can be fun, but it just wasn't deep enough at launch, and still isn't really deep enough for me to really give a damn about this. It feels like it was missing that extra meat, you know, just like a very core mode to just play through. Like how Splatoon had its single player mode and like the online multiplayer was its main focus. I don't know what ARMS main focus was. And new characters are cool, but it's just like, that wasn't gonna bring me back in the game. It's not like ARMS was severely lacking in playable characters at launch. It had a fine amount, enough to make things interesting. What was just missing was like that core mode, I think. I just felt like there was no incentive to like get better at the game, you know? It felt like Nintendo designed this game with the feeling that you would open it up and desperately want to be the best in the world without giving you a reason to want to be the best in the world. What I'm trying to say here is the gameplay loop, it wasn't fun enough for me to play for more than a couple hours, really. And adding new characters every couple of months, like, that didn't do a damn thing for me. But then, just 1 month later in 2017, we got Splatoon 2. Why did this have the same damn issues as Splatoon 1 at launch? This was also severely lacking in content, which was just ridiculous. I mean, like, we already went through this whole thing with Splatoon 1. Why are we doing this again with Splatoon 2? And yeah, over time, Splatoon 2 became incredibly rich in content, but at launch, it was a very similar story to Splatoon 1. Sure, you had Salmon Run mode, and you had a couple more stages than Splatoon 1 had at launch, but I was just expecting way more. But it's obvious with Nintendo releasing these two games back to back, they found value in the free update system, where, you know, as a consumer, you go like, oh my god, free updates, this is incredible. But where's the game? There's no game here. These are just a bunch of skeletons. Does Kirby Star Allies count? Because the free updates in this game, like, it doesn't do anything. I know a lot of people will say, like, oh my god, Kirby Star Allies is so much better after all the free updates. No, not for me at least. Like, my main problem with this game is that the story mode is just painfully bland. I don't care that it's easy, all Kirby games are easy, but I look at a game like Kirby Planet Robobot, or even Return to Dreamland and Triple Deluxe, Kirby in the Forgotten Land afterwards. Like, every stage in those games has like a reason to be. They're interesting to play through. They don't feel like you're brain dead while playing them. This does. And of course, after the main game, you get guest star mode, and you get all these free updates that included all these characters from past Kirby games, which is really cool. I do not want to underplay that. And then they also added another mode, Heroes in Another Dimension, which is at least doing something that a lot of these games don't do. Actually add modes. Because that's the main problem with a lot of these games. It's not the lack of characters. And that was my big thing with Star Allies. Like, Star Allies wasn't bad because, oh, there's not enough Kirby reference characters. Like, no, the core game is just not very good. But Heroes in Another Dimension is actually a pretty cool extra mode there. It doesn't really change my opinion of the game as a whole, but it's obvious with these free updates that they kind of knew there's something missing from this package. Much like Mario Tennis Aces, which followed a very similar deal to everything else. Pretty much for the next couple of months, we'd get brand new characters via free updates. They offered some characters exclusively via, like, tournaments, playing online tournaments, which I wasn't a huge fan of just because it felt like, oh my god, you know, the only way you can play this character is by connecting online, which, yeah, I don't like it. I mean, either way, like, all these characters you can only get, you know, via online updates. So, you know, that felt a little lame. Because what this game did with its free updates was pretty much lock a lot of content that you'd usually enjoy in other Mario sports games behind, you know, the internet, which also, like, by the fall of the year this game came out, you then had to pay for Nintendo Switch Online. So I'm just like, come on, guys. Co-op challenges? That was only available online. Why? They added it later via a free update, but it's just like, what? Why? This would have been great to have in the main game, but not only is it not in the main game, I had to wait months down the line to get them, but I can only play them online. Come on, man. Mario Tennis Aces is probably the best Mario sports game on Switch. I mean, the gameplay here is fantastic. They did a great job restructuring the tennis gameplay here to make like a genuinely unique and well-balanced experience. However, at launch, my god, this burned me. There just wasn't anything there. And the free updates, you know, it's good that they actually, like, added to the game later down the line. You know, this is something that I was expecting they would do with, like, Mario Tennis Ultra Smash on Wii U. That came out the same year as Splatoon, so I thought, like, man, this game is really light in terms of content. Well, what if they do what they did with Splatoon? No, they didn't. They added a lot to this game, but I stopped caring after a week of this game releasing. You know, it's a good game, and it's much better now. But man, this was just such a disappointment when it released. And the free updates, they didn't really excite me, more so annoyed me. And you know what's weird? You may not expect Super Smash Bros. Ultimate to be on this list, but they had a bunch of free updates to this game. You know, it's easy to forget, but remember, like, they added Stage Builder after the fact, Home Run Contest. A lot of features were missing from this game at launch. So it does feel like they would purposely hold back a lot of modes to later add down the line via free update. And, you know, like, you didn't need Stage Builder or Home Run Contest at launch. But by the time they actually added Home Run Contest, like, I don't give a damn about that mode. If you're just like, hey, Home Run Contest is back, like, I don't care. And the fact it came nearly a year after this game launched, like, why? It's Home Run Contest, and it's not like it was even that much different. Wild, but, you know, it's whatever. It's not like this was, like, significantly held back by lacking those features at launch. They put out what they needed to put out when Smash Ultimate released. But, yeah, it's pretty interesting how, they obviously do push out games before they can add absolutely everything they want to. And, yeah, they do push them out as free updates many times. They did a lot of that in 2018. It's pretty wild, but hey, at least Smash Ultimate came out pretty clean. Animal Crossing New Horizons did a very similar thing. Once again, I wouldn't really consider this to be like an incomplete game. It does feel like they left out a bunch of features, but, you know, for what was there at launch, like, you know, it's a complete experience. It's not like, oh my God, where are all these features? What is there to do in this game? Animal Crossing is in that weird area where it's hard to complain when you've spent over 200 hours in the game and say there's nothing to do. What's going on when you know you've already spent 200 hours in the game. But you know what I found really lame about this game was the fact that all the free updates they added were pretty much like old content from New Leaf. Pretty much stuff that was already like previously available in other Animal Crossing games fully at launch, and they held it back or they didn't complete it in time. It just felt really weird, and, you know, it doesn't really feel like they were, like, an integral part of the experience. It felt like, you know, New Horizons is a complete game, and then they just layered a bunch of stuff on top of it. So most of it was from New Leaf, but then they added, like, this giant final free update. You can farm, you can grow food, but it's just like, why are you doing that? You have the Broost. But why are you going there? You know, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Nothing's really integral to the core loop of the gameplay. And of course, it's Animal Crossing. It's weird to be like, oh, this isn't integral to the gameplay. Well, fucking nothing is. It's Animal Crossing. But it just all felt like it was just added into the game without other elements being tweaked. So they just kind of felt very, like, worthless. Just like very hollow additions. And then there's the holidays, which are garbage in New Horizons. Like, they initially announced them as like, hey, like, holidays are gonna be in the form of free updates now. And it's kind of like, okay, well, that's a little strange, but whatever. But all the holidays are so fucking basic in this game. It is ridiculous. I assume with the holidays being free updates, that would enable them to make them more special. You know, free updates. Oh my God, maybe every year it's gonna be a little different, or like, hey, they're just gonna do something special with it. No, it just feels like they didn't make them in time. They just wanted to push the game out in time and just be like, hey, well, let's just finish the holidays later. And then they half-assed them all. I love New Horizons. I think it's a little ridiculous to act like you didn't like New Horizons if you spent hundreds and hundreds of hours in the game. But man, like, the free updates here, it's cool how much they did. They did support this game quite a lot for like a year and a half, and then they stopped for God knows whatever reason. But the updates they added just felt so damn hollow. And then we have the Mario sports games that followed Mario Tennis. Mario Golf Super Rush, same problem as Mario Tennis, but they cut support for this way sooner. And Mario Golf doesn't really have the excuse that Mario Tennis had for the lack of content. Mario Tennis Aces may have had a lack of content at launch, but at the very least, like, the gameplay was severely upgraded. Like, they really went in and changed what Mario Tennis was. This doesn't. It's just, It's simplified ass Mario Golf. It's even simpler than before. And they had some new characters, some new courses, but like this was so damn phoned in. And like 6 months later, like they were done. Like that was the final update for this game. It's like, wow, that's a bunch of garbage. And Mario Strikers Battle League is even worse. This is like the worst Mario sports game. And not because of the gameplay. The gameplay is fine. It's a fun enough game, but there's nothing to do with it. There's just nothing to this one. Like, it is severely bare bones. And then they thought adding like 2 new characters and a stage and a couple pieces of gear every few months was gonna make this game better. No, like that's not what was severely lacking with this game. It's severely lacking in shit to do. The game is flawed at its core, and just putting a band-aid over it in the form of a goddamn Birdo character, that doesn't do anything for me. Yeah, this is the worst. This is the worst example of the free updates plague. And of course, you also have Nintendo Switch Sports, but that's just kind of boring to talk about here. Like, they added golf later on. Why? So yeah, that's just a few of the free updates games Nintendo has put out. There's also like Mario Maker 2, that had a bunch of free updates. But again, you know, similar to Mario Maker 1, that doesn't feel like they were trying to complete the game. Rather, they were adding on to an already complete game. There's also Splatoon 3, but Splatoon 3 felt pretty fully featured at launch, so I'm pretty thankful about that. But yeah, this has definitely made a handful of Nintendo's releases over the Wii U and Switch era feel pretty damn soulless. And many times, like, they do kind of fix things up a bit, you know, over the next few months, but many times they actually don't. You know, just adding like a couple new characters and maybe a new stage or something doesn't always fix the game at their core. I feel like a lot of these games just need to be complete at launch, mainly because, like, you know, all these elements play into each other a lot more than it seems, you know? Like, when you actually design these games as a complete unit, you can tell it all feels like, you know, every element is playing into each other. But when you kind of tear these games apart and release things later and just say, okay, well, we'll make that later down the line, it just makes everything feel a lot more isolated. Like, these free updates aren't really a part of the core experience. They're just kind of like band-aids on top of one. And I'm not gonna freak out if this is done more, because Nintendo likes doing it, but I feel like it severely hurt a game like Mario Strikers Battle League. It definitely really ruined that game's reputation, potentially that series' reputation. And I would really hope Nintendo takes a good look at that and reconsiders what they're doing, because this is something that makes sense from like a company perspective. So as a company, it's like, you know, hey, we'll release this game earlier and we'll save a lot of its content to release later down the line. We'll save money on development because then we only develop 70% of the game, and then we'll get a bunch of sales, and then we'll see if it's worth it to complete the game later down the line. And we'll disguise us completing the game as free updates. Like, oh my god, we're giving you so much extra stuff! When in reality, while I think some people may not have caught on to this for a good while, I think a game like Mario Strikers Battle League has definitely really showcased like what's really going on here. So please, Nintendo, I beg of you, stop giving me free shit!